Someone was asking me why I don't mix my own music anymore, and so as an artist that used to, I thought it'd be cool to explain just how complicated audio engineering is and how much it can make or break a song. Every artist approaches music different, but the way that I make music isn't like taking a beat from someone else or taking a beat from YouTube, for instance, and putting 5 to 10 vocal tracks on top of that. If that were the case, I would still mix my own music. I'm completely capable of that, but even that can be complicated. But no, the way that I make music, it's typically 60 to 140, 120 different audio channels that make up each one of my songs. My songs look like what you would expect a dubstep song to look like, except for, it's not dubstep. And it doesn't really sound like that. It sounds very simple, but that's intentional. So let's say we're starting with a single sound out of 80 sounds, right? C, right? Just a C. That C has a fundamental frequency, which you can see right there. But it has harmonics above and below that fundamental frequency. See, you cross the fundamental frequency and the whole thing kind of dies. Or you can take it from here. You hear that? And then maybe I want to add some harmonies as well, because the thing is, the fundamental frequency tells you the note, but all of the harmonies allow you to know what the instrument is. Like a piccolo has lower notes that are built into it. It has higher notes than the ones that you really hear that are built into every note. But it's like the combination of all of that information that allows you to distinguish a piccolo from a violin, from a trumpet, from a saxophone. And so you do all of this work, more than likely with a more complicated EQ like Pro Q3, that allows you to bring out the best in each individual sound by manipulating which frequencies you hear more of and which frequencies you hear less of. But then the thing is, as you boost and pull back on different frequencies, they begin to clash with all the other frequencies you might have going on. For instance, if there's 80 other frequencies or 80 other sounds going on, you've got to make sure that all of these adjustments sit well with each other so that nobody is clashing and that you can hear everything and that it makes sense. On top of this kind of EQ or like frequency arrangement you have to do to make sure that there's space, you then also have to do spatial arrangement. So how far to the left or to the right should something be so that there's space? Because if everything is to the left, it's going to feel lopsided and it's going to be cluttered. So you got to make sure that there's space all the way around. And if you're mixing in Dolby Atmos, which is what I'm gearing up to do, it's now setting that up not just for a left to right situation, but for a 10-point speaker system. So it's like very complicated, and that's just the EQ. So, there's this thing called the processing chain. This is like the first thing you do in the processing chain is just the EQ. And then you move on to the compression, and then you move on to the reverbs, and then you move on to the delays. And before all of that, if you were adding auto-tune to the song, perhaps you mess around with that. And then, comes all the fun stuff like phasers and flangers and what else? Tape saturators, bit crushers, X, Y, and Z, all of these things that are adding texture and flavor to the song. And it's part of the artistic process. That's why I work really closely with whoever's engineering the song. And I usually get my songs engineered twice. Once we're working on stylistic, trying to get all the details, the flavors, and the textures, because I feel like that's part of my job as the artist to decide what that is. And then twice to have someone go through and do all the cleanup work with the EQs and with all of those other things, with the spatial awareness, so that everything sits together really nicely and perfectly. And again, this is just me talking about one step in a process. A vocal chain can have like 20 different things in it, if it doesn't need to, but a vocal chain fundamentally is going to have like 6 things in it. It's going to have like the EQ, it's going to have some type of compressor, it's going to have some type of reverb, probably some type of delay. Maybe it has an auto tune on it, and then maybe the flavor things like a phaser or whatever the thing is to add the texture. And then on top of that, once all of the mixing is done, you have to do something like a golden ears test, which is basically where you put an EQ shelf on both sides. So all the lowest frequencies are cut out and all the highest frequencies are cut out, and you can only hear the middle. And that replicates what it would sound like on the worst speaker system possible. And if you can still hear every single element of the song when it sounds absolutely terrible, then you're good to go, because that means if someone's playing on an iPhone or on a $1 billion speaker system, it'll sound, at least you'll hear everything, right? You'll hear the bass no matter what you're playing it on. and then you send it off to the mastering engineer and they go through a whole different process. So it's really deep. But you already understand how some of this works. Like with the EQ spectrum, you know how an EQ spectrum works because your tongue is the first EQ spectrum you ever mess around with. You literally have an EQ filter built into your body, and I'll explain. So this is a very basic EQ filter, and if we do something called a high pass, that means we cut out all the low frequencies and only allow the highs to go through, right? It changes the sound in that way. Conversely, if we do something called a low pass, we only allow the low frequencies to go through, and it sounds like this. We do the exact same thing with our tongue. Check it out. So what happens if we put our tongue to the front of our mouth, right up against the roof of our mouth, and it looks like that? Okay, what happens if we put our tongue to the back of our mouth? Congrats, you now understand EQ. And once you get good, you can just hear a sound and say, ah, nah, that's got way too much 1K in it. Can you take some 1K out of my vocal there? Okay, that's pretty good. Can you boost like maybe around like 5K? I feel like I need a little bit. And that's the value I've found in having this knowledge. It's like I can hear a vocal and say like, oh, 16K needs to be boosted. It needs to be crispier, or 1K needs to be cut. And it gets it closer to what I want to hear. Like it helps my artistic vision.